Hello everyone, this is MC Deck Discussions and I am Abby Small. And today we're doing another deck discussion with the Psionic Spider Insider. And this is Rogue, and as you can see, it's leadership. And this one is in preparation for an actual two-deck comparison video. But I wanted to do this one separately because I can tell both decks are going to need a fair amount of discussion time. So I wanted to do this one separately first so that in the two-deck discussion video, I can focus more on the other deck, which is going to be from Villain Theory. So let's go ahead and get started here. So I have a note right off the bat. So notice it says there are 42 cards in this deck. Now in my mind, there are actually only 41 cards in the deck. They count touched as one of the cards in the deck. And even it's not a permanent, so I see why that is. It is part of the setup. So if we look at Rogue and her alter ego, setup, set your touch upgrade aside. So in my mind, I consider it to be not part of the deck. So I consider this to be a 41 card deck, but technically it is 42 cards. So a person could choose to pare the deck down by 2 cards if they wish to. But in my mind, this is just a 41 card deck. So not too much past that 40 at all for those who really care about that. And if somebody is wanting to modify this deck, wouldn't be that difficult to pair out a card or two in this deck. So first of all, I want to talk about something special for my deck in particular. So we have a house rule for solo rogue play. So this is actually... It has a house rule for solo rogue play, but it could also be used as a multiplayer deck, which most of my decks aren't built for multiplayer, though I'm sure a lot of them could be used for multiplayer. This one really could be used for multiplayer, I would think, because the house rule is meant to mimic some of what occurs in a multiplayer game. So here is what that house rule is. So this is to allow one to more fully play her kind of similarly to how she can be played in multiplayer. So this deck is designed to go with Miles Morales' Spider-Man. So as we can see here, here's the key about this particular Spider-Man. He has the traits of champion and web warrior. So the way this solo house rule works is I just keep out the Spider-Man hero card to represent having a partner that you are playing with. So I don't have another deck out or anything. I'm not playing two-handed. I just have this other card out, and this allows me to use touched on to attach it to Spider-Man here, and therefore gain the champion and web warrior trait and be able to more fully utilize some of her cards, some of Rogue's cards. So let's go back to the deck and see what I mean by that. So first of all, we have the touched card itself, right? So if I click on that, we can see that actually I better mention her ability first. Okay. So Rogue has the skin contact ability, which is an action that allows attached touch to another character. You gain each of the attached character's traits until the end of the round. And then if there's a forced response after the player phase begins, you find touched and set it aside. So that's, whenever your turn begins on the hero side, that's what you're going to do. But the goal is to attach touch to a variety of characters. So let's look at what happens when you do so. So you have touched here now. So if touch is attached to a minion, then Rogue's attacks gain overkill. There isn't really anything else that goes with that. It's pretty much that's the one thing that occurs. If you attach it to a villain, Rogue gains Retaliate 1, and her other cards she has some other cards, particularly events, that will give her special results when she has Retaliate. She can also attach touch to an ally. Rogue then gains the aerial trait, and again, those same events will have a different effect when Rogue has aerial. And then if she attaches it to a hero, Rogue gains stalwart. And again, there are special effects on those events when Rogue gains stalwart. So if typically when you're playing solo, you don't have access, first of all, to getting stalwart at all if you are playing, with the traditional rules with no house rule. This way, you can attach it to another hero with my house rule, and Rogue can gain stalwart. If she gains stalwart, then her other abilities, so let's look at some of those events. So first of all, there is Goin' Rogue. So this is her, it's a 2-cost event, and it's a superpower, and it is a thwart. So she has the hero action, remove 3 threat from a scheme. Then if Rogue has aerial, she removes 2 additional threat, retaliate. That's what she gains when she puts it on the villain, is retaliate. She confuses an enemy, so very convenient there. And if she has stalwart, she can draw a card. So whenever she attaches touched to that, the faux ally that you have over on the side, not ally, the extra hero you have over on the side, in this case, Miles Morales' Spider-Man, then you gain stalwart, plus, now that you have stalwart, you can draw 1 card when you use this. Similarly, her attack card, Southern Cross, has the same types of effects. And again, going to the stalwart effect, you use Southern Cross, it's an attack, it's a 3-cost superpower, it deals 6 damage to an enemy, and if she has stalwart, she can draw a card. And I might as well mention, if she has aerial, she does 2 additional damage, so it would be 3 for 8 damage. If she has retaliate, she would stun that enemy. So again, you attach it to, say, a minion you could stun, but of course, the majority of the time, you would attach it to the villain in order to stun the villain. So those extra effects are not something you can tap into if you're playing true solo with the traditional rules, hence my reason for using the house rule. This is currently the only house rule that I have anymore. I did a separate video on various house rules that I've used in the past. This is the one house rule that I keep because I want to more fully utilize her abilities. I play only solo. It's not really accessible to me to play multiplayer in any meaningful way with my living situation. And so I want to have more fun with the deck, and this makes it a lot more fun for me. And I figure some of you might be interested in perhaps being able to have more fun in solo as well with her. And it seems like a reasonable house rule to me. All right, continuing on. Oh, and as I mentioned, you could just play this deck in multiplayer, and you would want to partner up with somebody who is utilizing Miles Morales' Spider-Man. A quick note on the name. So I was just, having fun being a little bit clever here. So there are a lot of, first of all, there's Miles Morales, right? So you have this spider idea, and you can game the Web Warrior trait because of that. But also there are a fair number of psionic allies in here, so you can also gain the psionic trait. So hence thy Psionic Spider. And you're an insider. You kind of have the inside track on the Spider multiverse, and then it's also a part of, since she has that trait, it's inside her, it's a part of her. And then I just like the sound of it. So the Psionic Spider, insider, kind of sounds like you're saying insider twice. So just a little side note on that, just having fun with it. Okay. So a quick note on the villains tested against. Each of these villains I played in standard and expert, and it was against Claw, Taskmaster, and Magneto. Undefeated against all of them, and it was actually, this is a very fun control deck. You'll see why in a little bit. Even against Magneto, I've never felt so relaxed playing against Magneto before, which was kind of nice because I played Magneto fairly often, and it felt good to actually play somewhat relaxed. So I just felt like I had an answer to pretty much every problem presented by the villain in all the cases, but it was really cool to see that with Magneto in particular. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at the notable elements of play, and then from there, it'll make sense to go over and look at the specifics of the deck. Okay, so there are some overarching strategies here. So the first one is you always have targets available for Superpower Adaptation. So there are 3 copies of Superpower Adaptation. It's a 0-cost event, a superpower, and it has this hero action. If touched is attached to a friendly character, search its owner's discard pile for an event that belongs to the same classification as that character. Now, this doesn't do any good with my house rule. I don't have a separate deck for Miles Morales, so I'm not going to be searching Miles Morales's discard pile since there is none. But for her own, she would then therefore use this card when she has attached it to an ally. So because this is a key element of this build, there are a bunch of allies in this deck. So you can see there are 12 of them. That's why. So I realize this looks like, oh, this is just another ally swarm deck. Well, sure. Yeah. You got to have a lot of allies that's going to be swarming. But that's not the true build here. The true build is to be able to maximize the usage of superpower adaptation, and having a lot of allies out with particular traits helps to facilitate that, and with specific aspects, meaning the leadership aspect and then the non-aspect basic. So why does that matter? So let's look at that. So if we look at the rest of this ability, if touch is attached to a friendly character, search its owner's discard pile for an event that belongs to the same classification as that character. It could be identity specific. So if this is attached to Gambit, which is her identity specific ally, then that means she can search her discard pile for any of her own events, her own identity specific events. So, and that's an important thing, by the way. Once you get Gambit out in play, if at all possible, you want to keep Gambit out in play the rest of the game, because that's a really powerful usage of touched, because you have access then to her powerful events, both the thwart event and the attack event being powerful, both because one can do a lot of thwarting, the other can do a lot of a lot of threat removal, and the other one can do a fair amount of damage, right? Possible up to three cost for 8 damage. But also bringing those to your hand gives you the possibility of either stunning in the case of the attack, or confusing the villain in the case of going rogue for the thwart. Okay, so but for the most part, you would be going for the extra damage when you're using Southern Cross. That's a lot of times the big purpose there. Okay? But sometimes you don't want to play it right away, to keep it in your hand to get ready to stun. Okay? So going back to superpower adaptation. Oh, excuse me. I didn't actually mean to go to this version, but that's okay. We're already here. So if you attach it to your identity specific ally, those are the type of cards you can get from your discard pile. If you attach it to an aspect ally, in this case a leadership ally, you can go to your discard pile to look for any event cards that are leadership, and I'll show you those soon. Or if it's attached to a basic ally, you can look for any event cards that are basic, that are in your discard pile. And then you get to add those cards to your hand. So let's go find, I'm going to go ahead and go to the allies soon enough, but I think it's important at this point, after talking about superpower adaptation, let's go look at those possible events that we might gain. All right. And by the way, we're still on, overarching strategies number 1. You want to get superpower adaptation, have a target for it. Okay. So if you do target, say, one of these many leadership allies, right? We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 leadership allies. You have the ability to grab Make the Call. So we already have 3 copies of Make the Call in the deck to be able to get back any of these allies that we wish. But in addition to that, we could actually access them even more when they're in our discard pile by using superpower adaptation and attaching it to one of our leadership, our blue allies here. In addition, there's Psychic Kicker. Now, Psychic Kicker can only be played if your identity has the psionic trait. What Psychic Kicker does is it readies an ally, and that ally gets +2 thwart and +2 attack for its next basic thwart or attack action this phase. Well, we have in this deck, we have Cable, who is a psionic. We have Kid Omega, who's a psionic ally. We have M, who is a psionic ally. And we have Phoenix, who's a psionic ally. So all 4 of those give the possibility of grabbing Psychic Kicker. And I did find I used, I think, pretty much every single game that I played, right? This was 6 different games. Every single one of those games, I actually played the card one time. And I'm pretty sure that's the way it was. I didn't really keep track, but that's the way, that's what I kept remembering happening. So those are the reasons for having these various allies as targets. In addition, we can target the basic allies. So notice we have in here a number of basic allies that are also Web Warrior traded. So when we have put touched on our foe co-hero, Miles Morales, we then gain the champion trait and the Web Warrior trait. So we can play Ghost Spider. We can play Spider-Man Hobie Brown, and we can play Spider-Man Peter Parker. In addition, we would be able to play Moon Girl at that time too. And unlike a lot of my other decks, Moon Girl is just meant to be played once and gain the benefits of being able to draw some cards if the mental resources are used to pay for her. So she's just meant to be used once per pass through the deck. She's not meant to be like recycled through a bunch of times. Nick Fury is meant to be recycled through a number of times. So a lot of times you will use Make the Call, for an example, to get Nick Fury out so that you can then draw 3 cards. Okay? But there are reasons to grab some of the other cards as well, such as Ghost Spider. But let me continue with the events first before we talk about the rest of the allies here. So we had Ghost Spider, Spider-Man, Hobie Brown, and Spider-Man Peter Parker. And then we also have Professor X, Nick Fury, Moon Girl, right? So all of those, if those are targeted by touched, then if Across the Spider-Verse is in our discard pile, we can grab that card. And Across the Spider-Verse is kind of like a version of Make the Call that's specific to Web Warriors, right? So if you grab Across the Spider-Verse, it's a hero action. You have to exhaust a Web Warrior card you control, which could be our hero, right? If we have attached, if she currently has the Web Warrior trait because of attaching touch to Miles Morales, the hero. However, more often than not, you will have wanted to have played Web of Life and Destiny. Because Web of Life and Destiny, you can play that. If you have the Web Warrior trait, you get to ignore the resource cost of this card. So you could play it anyway, but typically that's not what you're going to want to do. You're going to want to play it when you have the Web Warrior trait so you can play it for free. And it has this ability: after a Web Warrior ally leaves play, choose a player. That player draws 1 card. So once you have the Web of Life and Destiny, that card can be the card that you exhaust. Right? So it says here, right, exhaust a Web Warrior card you control. So you can exhaust that card, which has no impact on that card. And then you can search your discard pile for a Web Warrior ally and put it into play. Then you could choose a player, yourself in this case, if you're playing it single player, and that player can spend 3 resources of any type to repeat this ability. So, which that second time, pretty much almost, I think I've only used that second time once ever in all my history of using that card in any deck. So typically it's just that first one, but basically you get out these 3 cost allies for a cost of 2. So that's pretty nice. And then in addition, there's this 1 spare card, First Aid, and this might be a target that somebody might use, but I actually really appreciated having First Aid in here. First of all, it gives a second card that could be in your discard pile that you could, so that you're not just wasting touched. You could use it on one of your allies and bring First Aid back into your hand and play it for 1 cost and heal 2 damage from any character. So sometimes I used it on Rogue. Other times I used it on, what were some of the common ones here? Let's see. Oh, here we go. So a lot of times I would use it, quite a few times I've used it on Spider-Man Peter Parker because, so now let's talk about these allies. So it has the Web Warrior trait, and it's required that you pay using 3 resources here to play it. However, if you use either Make the Call or Across the Spider-Verse to put Spider-Man into play, you get to ignore that requirement, right? So of using an energy, a mental, and a physical resource. Okay. So it has this response. He has this response: after Spider-Man attacks or thwarts, choose another Web Warrior character, ready that character. So that could be one of these other characters, but it could also be Rogue if you have used touched on any of the Web Warrior characters that you have in play, including the Miles Morales hero that we have sitting on the side. Okay? So I've often used it at that because then, not that, I meant to go to Spider-Man again. So then that gives you healing him for 2 gives you 2 extra opportunities to do this again, right? So you can use his thwart or attack, use one of those abilities, and then be able to ready another Web Warrior character. So that ends up being powerful to be able to use that multiple times. I've also used it on Gambit because Gambit's the character that I want to try to keep out permanently once I get out. And the reason for that being that I want Gambit to be able to be utilized for superpower adaptation, but also as long as he's out there, he might as well do something. so I heal him for 2, he can continue to thwart for 2, and he can attack for 2, and he has this interrupt, right? Because when he comes into play, he has 3 charge counters on him, and he has this interrupt. So when he attacks, remove 1 charge counter from him and deal 1 damage to an enemy. So you get a chance to more fully utilize his thwart and attack if you heal him once in a while. So I did find First Aid to be highly valuable. I tended to use it almost every game, and sometimes a couple of times a game. But even just one time, which most of the time it was just one time, it was still worth it. Okay, so I'm not going to get into the specifics of all these various allies. Those will be things that, instead of getting into those details and making this go a lot longer, we'll just say, these are allies. You can all check the abilities out and see why I might have included them in this deck. The main thing is they're traits a lot of the time, although these are the best allies in my mind for those traits. All right, so that was, the first overarching strategy, using that superpower training. You want to have lots of targets for it. And then we also want to use touched, and I think I pretty much mentioned this already. Yes. So we want to use, this is the second one, use touched on Miles Morales' Spider-Man, the extra hero, in order to be able to play Moon Girl, play Web of Life of Destiny for free, or be able to play one of the Web Warrior allies from hand, right? With Make the Call or Across the Spider-Verse, I could play them anytime from the discard pile, but this gives me the ability to also play them from hand. I did find that I played them from hand a lot less often. There were other allies that tended to be the ones I wanted to play from hand, and the Web Warrior allies, I often played from my discard pile. Moon Girl, of course, you do want to play from hand because her response is, after you play Moon Girl from your hand, you draw 1 card for each mental resource used to pay for her. Speaking of which, we did make sure to have a mental resource available at all times with the X-Jet. So that's included in here. So if we're looking at the supports, we had Helicarrier as well to help with playing cards from your hand, at least. The X-Jet could help play cards from your hand, or also utilize them to when you're playing them from your discard pile, or putting them into play from your discard pile. And then, of course, we already mentioned the Web of Life and Destiny. I'm going to go to the upgrades next because Clarity of Purpose is notable, because this is another resource generator, right? You have to exhaust this card and deal 1 damage to the attached character. That attached character I always chose was Rogue. And you generate a wild resource. One of the cool things about using Clarity of Purpose in this deck, by the way, is that Rogue has a card that does heal her. So the energy transfer card, so it's touched to a character other than Rogue and deal 2 damage to that character. Then you get to heal 2 damage from Rogue and ready her. So we have multiple opportunities to heal Rogue from her 2 energy transfer cards, and also from First Aid. And speaking of which, might as well mention, she has, if we look here, we can see that Rogue has Thwart 2, an Attack 2, and a Defensive 2, plus 11 hit points, and a hand size of 5. So pretty robust with the 11 hit points. It tends to feel like quite a few hit points. And especially if you have the ability to heal her, you can stay in hero side quite a while. And then And then the other thing, the reason why we want to ready rogue frequently is because, 2 attack and 2 thwart is pretty good, but rogues, when you get rogue's jacket into play, then while touched is attached to a friendly character, rogue gets +1 thwart. And then while a touched is attached to an enemy character, rogue gets +1 attack. So she can have +1 attack or +1 thwart at any time. So that makes her a lot more effective when she's getting readied frequently. All right, and then to finish off the cards that have been added to this deck, we also have build support to help get in any 3 of these. There are times, I think there was one time I even used it to get Web of Life and Destiny back, where I actually had it out the very first play, and the villain immediately, drew the card that gets rid of it. so I ended up getting it back with build support. And then I also included Call for Backup, which is one of my favorite cards in leadership decks. And this one is another player side scheme, and it has when defeated, each player may search their deck and discard pile for an ally and put it into play. Most of the time that was Nick Fury to get the card draw, but periodically I would bring out other cards that were just more critical in the moment, notably Spider-Man, Peter Parker being one of the primary other targets that I might use. And then we have the standard Energy, Genius, and Strength for our double resource cards. Okay. So as I mentioned before, this was a very cool deck, a lot of fun to play, and it was very controlled. I was just amazed at just what a great job it did against Claw, Taskmaster, and especially Magneto. And, I recommend this deck. In this case, the only deck I've created so far that I actually would recommend that people try in multiplayer, but also with this house rule for solo play. It wouldn't make sense to use this deck the way it's built for solo play without the house rule. Right? But having this amount of recursion available to keep bringing allies back with Across the Spider-Verse and Make the Call, sometimes getting an extra powerful attack or thwart from those allies with Psychic Kicker, all of that was very effective, and like I said, a lot of fun. If you enjoy this type of content, please be sure to like and subscribe, and be prepared for when the 2-deck comparison comes out, where I'll be focusing on Villain Theory's deck in that video, with just this one on the side, just to make sure we have what we need for the comparison. All right, everybody have a good one.